Hi everybody, my name's Aaron Blaise and I'm the guy that created this month's cover image for ImagineFX magazine, and so I'm here to talk to you about how I did it, why I do it the way I do it, and all that kind of fun stuff. First I thought I'd give you a little bit of background on kind of where I come from and why I ended up doing this kind of style with realistic textures and that sort of thing. My background is illustration. I'm a graduate of the Ringling College of Art and Design in Sarasota, Florida, where I got a certificate in illustration. And then I went into animation, and I was with Disney for 21 years. I worked on Beauty and the Beast, Aladdin, The Lion King, Pocahontas, Mulan. I directed a film called Brother Bear. And during that time, you know, those were all hand-drawn films, and when we would design our characters and that sort of thing, we were drawing them by hand, and they ended up in a hand-drawn medium. So there wasn't a huge leap from the design stage to the final stage. And the number of iterations, meaning the number of times we would have to go back and forth, was fairly small. Until we went into the computer animated zone era after Toy Story. And so then all of a sudden, you know, especially now, films started becoming more and more real looking. They were stylized, but they were lit realistically, textured realistically. And then all of a sudden, that hand-drawn, pencil drawing, watercolor, pen and ink, whatever it might be, initial drawing to the finished look in the film, there's a big leap there. There's a lot of iterations that a design had to go through before we could get to that finished look. And so I discovered, both as a designer and a director, that when I went into the digital realm, when I started working in Photoshop and I could create images there, all of a sudden I found, through using found textures through photography and my own painting abilities, I could mix the two together and I could create imagery that, in my mind, looked closer to the final look of the film. So let's say as a director, I could go home and create a character or something that I had in my head, and I could go back to the art director, I could go back to the crew, or I could show it to the executives if I'm trying to get something approved. And there I could say, hey, this is what I picture the film looking like. And it was a much clearer idea trying to get across to whoever it is I'm trying to get it across to. So what does that do? Well, it increases the number, the ability to get something approved from an executive standpoint, but it also decreases on the number of iterations, meaning the number of times I would have to go back and forth before we'd finally get something approved from a production standpoint, whether it's with an art director or an animator, designer, that sort of thing. We started to be able to create that final look, that vision that we had in our heads digitally. And so I want to take you through that process. One other thing I want to mention is that I'm not a digital guy. You're going to see the only thing I've really done is I work in layers. I love to work in a lot of different layers. And so what I've done is I've kind of carried over my traditional thinking in drawing and painting and that sort of thing, and I've brought it back into working digitally. So I don't do a whole lot of different blend modes, although you'll see a couple different ones here. I don't use a ton of brushes. I don't do a ton of tricks. So it really comes down to strong drawing and strong painting skills. If there's anything I can't stress enough today talking to you guys is, you know, get out and draw from life. Really hone your draftsmanship, really hone your drawing skills and your painting skills. Look at lighting and that sort of thing. There's no real shortcut around that stuff. The thing I like to tell students is that, yes, we're working on a computer, we're working with a stylus, we're working digitally, but it's still just a big fancy pencil and a big fancy paintbrush. Okay? So let's just dive into it. So the first thing I like to do is I like to start with, from a size standpoint, I like to start, let me pull this up right here. I'm going to go to image, size, and I want to show you. So this one, because this is the dimensions of the cover, this is the dimensions I needed to use. So this is 15 inches by almost 20 inches, and it's 300 DPI. I do everything 300 DPI, and as far as my dimensions go, I don't go any bigger than 20 inches and any smaller than 10 inches. I find that window in between there will give me a detailed enough image that we can blow it up as big as we want, and it holds everything that we need. So those are the sizes I do. The next thing you're going to see is I've toned it gray. So, if you start off with a white document, all you do is come over, you grab your color picker. I like to grab a somewhat neutral or a neutral mid-tone value and come over, grab my paint bucket right here, right there, grab the paint bucket, and then I just fill it, okay? And what that does is, the reason I like to start on a gray background rather than a white background, or even black for that matter, gray is in the middle. And so what that enables you to do is that you can judge your values, value meaning light and dark, you can judge them more accurately. If I were to start on a white background, nothing is any brighter than white. So anything I put down is going to be darker than white. And so what that does is that it fools the eye into thinking that everything you put down is actually darker than it really is. So if I start in the middle, things that are lighter will show lighter, things that are darker will show lighter, or show darker, and it'll be a little bit more accurate. Okay, so it's easier to judge. So I start with that gray background. The other thing too I want to mention, I've already done the illustration. You can see I've got all the layers over here on the right. If I were to take you through this in real time, this takes me about 8 to 12 hours to do. Obviously, we can't do a video that long. So I'm going to take you through the steps. I'm going to do a little bit of drawing on each layer, and I'm going to show you how I do them. So this first layer that we're going to do, I'm going to drop it down here. I'm going to find, there it is our rough drawing. So what I'll do is I'll create my first layer right over the gray layer, and I'll label it. Make sure you label everything too. I just want to mention that. Because I like to work in a lot of layers, as this builds up, if you don't label them, you're gonna get lost. Okay, so I like to label every single layer. I double click on it, and I'll just label it exactly what it is, and it's rough drawing. Okay, and so what I do is grab a brush. Now, once again, I'm going to jump into some advice on brushes. You're going to look over here. I've got tons of brushes. Excuse me. I've got tons of brushes that you can see in my library. I use about 2% of them. I really don't use that many. These are brushes that people have given me, and when they give them to me, I'm really looking for one brush, but they give me a whole library. And I'm terrible at keeping things organized, so I have a ton of them in here. But there's one certain brush that I use that I created, and I'm actually including it with the article. Is this brush right here? It's a pastel-y looking brush, so I call it pastel. And so if you look, if I make it really big, and I'm going to knock that up there, knock this down. If you look, you can see this really great texture. I like that texture. I like that it creates, it's lagging a little bit, but I like that it creates a very organic feel. I don't like digital looking images. I like it to look organic. I like it to look traditional, and to me, that's my personal taste. So I like working with this type of brush. So I'm going to get rid of that, create a new layer, rough drawing. And so the first thing I'm going to do is it's about 55 pixels for this size. I'm going to knock that opacity up, but I'm putting the pressure sensitivity on there. So the harder I push, the darker it'll be. And then what I do is, this is the rough drawing stage. This is the stage where you just explore. And so in my head, I had an idea of what I wanted my character to be, and I literally will draw just this rough. I knew I had this character that, I wanted multiple arms. I wanted him to be kind of fun. I wanted him to be cute. So I'm giving him cute proportions. I've got the eyes kind of set low on the head, big forehead, set wide apart. These are all cute proportions. He's smiling, and I wanted to work in this kind of radial feel to the arms. Get that body laid in there, the leg. Rough in the tree. There's a leg here. All right. So that the idea is to not really noodle. Don't get into the details at this point, because at this point you want to just explore. And so what I'll do is I'll just sit here and I'll explore different proportions. I'll change the head size. I'll do all kinds of stuff. This is the rough drawing. This is where you can be scribbly and really fun with it. Once you land on something that you like, I'm going to turn this off and show you the rough drawing that I ended up with. I'm going to turn up that opacity. So this is the rough drawing that I ended up with. I liked the pose. I liked how the weight was feeling. I got this weight coming off of this hand up here in the tree. And actually, I moved the branch over a little bit to make it feel like he's hanging from that tree. But this is where I ended up. And so once I get someplace that I like, and notice how rough it is. Once I get someplace I like, then it's time to start refining the drawing. And the way I do that is I'll take the rough drawing and I'll knock that opacity down. Look over to the right. I'll knock that opacity down, to about 25, 30%, somewhere in there. And then I'll create a new layer on top. Remember that. And I'm going to call it refined drawing because I'm going to refine the drawing. Okay? So I'm going to knock that size of the brush down. Notice it's the same brush. I'm going to knock the size of it down. I'm going to put the tapered, there's this little icon up here, little button to push up here that gives you the tapered look to it. The harder you press, the bigger the stroke will be. And I go in and I blow it up, and this is where I just take my time. I'm going to sit in here. I'm going to start, like I said, refining the drawing. This is where I work in all of the details, the wrinkles, all of the little details that are going to make this drawing sing. And the reason I spend so much time at this stage getting everything to look right is because this is the blueprint. This is the basis for the rest of the painting. Everything else is going to hang on this drawing, okay? So, good draftsmanship is key to, I think, a good painting. If you can't draw, you're going to struggle. And once again, that's my opinion. And it's been my experience. And so, as often as you can, get out there and draw from life, sketch, that sort of thing. Even if you're doing imaginary creatures like this here, I'm pulling from all these experiences that I've had drawing from life, whether it's drawing at the zoo or just drawing a still life, because there I'm seeing how light falls on objects. All these things will combine together in your brain over time so that you can make up stuff like little creatures like this, and you'll see when we paint it, I understand lighting. And then, when I'm creating this creature, I'm pulling from all these experiences of other animals that I've drawn, so I'm thinking about anatomy and that sort of thing. But anyway, I'll sit here and I will create this drawing, make it, and like I said, you want to get all the details, make sure everything's laid in, because on top of this is gonna hold together the whole painting. So I'm going to show you. So that ultimately is what I ended up drawing to get the final the refined drawing. So, and also, I mean, it's still fairly loose. I just kind of blew through it, but there's enough detail in there that's going to hold everything together, and I can go in and I can start painting. Okay, so that's the next step. That is the refined drawing, and I'm gonna knock that opacity of the rough drawing down a little bit more because I want that refined drawing to be dominant. Okay, so the next thing I'm going to do is now we want to start laying in the color. And the first layer of color that I like to put in is what's called the local color. Now, local color is the color of an object when it's not lit and it's not in shadow. It's just the color of an object. And as you'll notice that as we progress through these stages, I like to start in the middle. Even with that gray background, I like to start in the middle, and then I'm going to go dark, and then I'm going to go light, and then I'm going to go darker, and then I'm going to go lighter with my shadows and my highlights and that sort of thing. So local color is starting in the middle. There's no light on it. There's no shadow on it. So what I'll do is I'll take those, create a layer underneath the rough drawing and the refined drawing. So I'm going to create a layer, and what are we going to call it? We're going to call it local color. Okay. And what I'll do is I'll take that same brush, or actually, because that brush was lagging a little bit, I'm going to grab a different custom brush that I've got. You can use any of the brushes that Photoshop provides. They're all great brushes. I particularly like the erodible brushes. They look like little pencil tips. They're very organic feeling. But I'm just going to grab this brush for right now. I'll come in, and I'm going to grab. Well, I want them to be green, so I'm going to grab kind of this mid-green. And I'm going to start off, it's a little big for a brush. I'm going to start off just coloring them in, okay? And I'm very quick about this. And even though I've got all the final drawing, the refined drawing in here, I'm still not super worried about painting in the lines and all that kind of stuff. That drawing's going to stay on top for now, and it's still going to be my guide. So the whole idea is to really roughly put in this dominant color, which is this green. And once again, this is my style. There's a ton of different styles or methods out there that people use, but I'm here to show you kind of what I've developed over the last few years working digitally. Okay? So imagine I've filled this all in. While I'm also at the stage, I like to vary up some of the colors. If you look at a person's face, for example, it's not all one color. You're going to have areas of red. We're going to have splotches. We're going to have all kinds of stuff. And so this animal, to a more extreme degree, I'm going to add some different coloration. So here I'm thinking maybe some blues. I'm going to go even more blue with it. You know, and just have some fun with the color. Maybe do some yellows in the eyes. And just like I said, just have some fun with it. I might even put some reds in there. But anyway, so what I ended up with was something that looked like this. So you can see it's still very basic. It looks like a drawing that's just been colored in, like in a coloring book. But we're already starting to get a little bit of life to it. And the other thing too, I put it on a separate level because I like to keep my elements separate. But I have a tree layer that I laid in some color in very quickly with the kind of the airbrush mode. And there you have it. So 3 stages we've got so far. And this goes very quickly. This only took me probably about an hour to get to this stage. 45 minutes, something like that. So what we've got is we've got our rough drawing, we've got our refined drawing, we've got our local color. This is the basis for the rest of the painting now. Okay? So now, what do we want to do next? Well, like I said earlier, I like to go back and forth. I start in the middle, which is our local color. Now the first thing I want to do is I want to create the shadow patterns. Now, I'm thinking about this character. I'm thinking about him being in a forest. And so if I'm going to create shadows, there's not just going to be a direct light on them, but there's going to be dappled light. There's going to be light, there's going to be branches and leaves and stuff shining or casting shadows down on him. So I start thinking about where all that kind of stuff might lay. So with that in mind, I'm going to create a layer on top of the refined drawing, which means I'm going to put a layer on top, create a new layer, but this time I'm going to change the blend mode. So over here where it says normal, I'm going to come down to multiply. Now the reason I like to use multiply when I'm doing shadows is that it does just that. It multiplies with the color underneath. So what I like to do is pick a nice neutral cool color because your shadows are cool. And I'll be talking about color temperature a little bit more in a little bit. But I like to pick a nice cool neutral color and then start working that over the top of what I've created on the local color, and that cool color will mix with the local color and it'll start feeling cooler and it'll look like a shadow, and because it's multiplying it, it'll be darker. Okay, and I'll show you what I mean. Well, obviously we don't want to go with this color because it's warm. I'm going to move up into this blue area and I'm going to get pretty neutral with it. Come over here and I'm going to start lightly putting in the shadow. I'm going to knock that opacity down, bring the size up a little bit, and you can see how that color shows through underneath. Now I'm imagining like maybe this whole part of the body is in shadow because I want the attention to be on the face ultimately in the end. So what I like to do is the areas that I want to have attention. One method I like to use is, that'll be the area of greatest contrast. So in order to do that, I'm kind of putting all the rest of the body into shadow. You can see I've done it here. But now now I'm thinking, okay, the bottom of this arm is going to be in shadow. I'll blow this up a little bit. I'm still very loose at this stage, okay? This part of the face. I'm thinking about the light source being kind of over my right shoulder and shining down through the trees on this guy. Okay, so underneath the chin, all of this would be in shadow. So I just roughly put it in. This side of the nose, the snout, whatever you want to call it, will be in shadow. Might even cast a little shadow here. this part of the face, and I'll just work the whole thing in this way. The face will be casting shadow on the ear here, like so. And you can see the form starts to materialize right out of this because we're thinking about form now and thinking about where the light and shadows will fall. All right, maybe there's even a shadow, like a branch shadow, that it's coming across just to add interest, like so. So anyway, I'll just work the whole thing in this way, okay? So that ultimately, I'm going to get rid of this and turn on the shadow layer that I created earlier, so that we end up with something like this. Now, all we've done is as far as the color layers go, we've only done 2 layers. We've done a local color and a shadow layer, but already, in a very rough way, we're starting to see some forms start to materialize, and we're starting to get, very faintly, we're starting to get a good sense of light. Okay? So the next thing I like to do, if I've jumped over to the shadows, then the next layer I want to create is some direct light. Okay? And this is where we're going to start really getting into color temperature. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to create a layer on top of my shadow layer. I'm going to call it direct light. Okay? And what I'll do is I'll grab my color picker like this, but then rather than grab anything in there, I'm going to take the ink dropper, and you can see there's a little ink dropper here. Let's say we want to start the face. I'll grab the color that I'm starting with. Let's say I'll grab that nose. I know the light is going to hit this area, but I want it to be brighter. So I start there, and you see what it does? See, when I tap it, it gives me that color over on the left side here on the color picker. And then I'll go warmer with it, and I'll go brighter. Okay? I'm going warmer and brighter. The things in light are going to be warmer. It's sunlight. You can have cool light, but in this case, this is sunlight. So I want it to be warmer, and the shadows are going to be cooler. Okay? So I picked that warm color, and this also enables me to start thinking about like wrinkles coming across the top of the nose here. It enables me to start, and I'll jump back and forth, grabbing color, warming it up as the color changes across the local color. But anyway, what this does is this enables me to start really defining the details of some of this form. Okay? I'm actually going to change my brush back to the one that I started with, that little pastel brush that I made that I like so much. I really like the feel of that. But you can see I go in and I start working all these details. I'm touching that, over the eye, and then going warmer with it and brighter. And you can see, start to get a little bit of, right up against that shadow, I'll create some light, So you can see over on the cheek, oh, my cat's coming over. Go away. I'm busy. Come over onto the cheek, create some light here. And I'll just slowly build up this sense of light throughout the entire piece. The sides of the leaves, these areas here. I'm still being fairly loose with it, but notice also I'm working on top of that drawing layer, because ultimately we want that drawing layer, that line work, to go away, and we want to be left with just a painted layer. Okay? And so I'll work that and work it and work it. And this will take a little while. You just take your time and start really thinking about the form. I'm thinking about how that light is hitting, this part of the face, that sort of thing. I come down here. This shoulder should be really bright, so I'm going to, really brighten that up. And come in here. Let's enlarge that brush a little bit and hit some of these leaves. It'll be more in direct light. This arm, you'll have some direct light hitting it. You can just really kind of go through and really start to define some of that light, so that sense of light will become more and more, will be stronger. And so I'm going to turn on that direct light layer, and you can see that I went through and really kind of hit all these areas, and built up that warmer, pure color, so that I'm going to turn that on and off so you can see that really starts to give it a great sense of light. Okay? I did it in the eyes, that sort of thing. I even went in and started a little bit of bounced light, which I'm going to elaborate a little bit more on reflected light on another layer. But you can see now, just through these 4 layers that we've created, that we've really got a good sense of light happening now. I'm going to turn them off again, just so you can see. Now we start with this rough drawing, then we go to that refined drawing, local color, we go to the shadows, then we go to that direct light. Look how much it really just comes together just in those few steps. And also I got to mention that I'm adding direct light and a little bit of texture onto the tree itself. So if I turn, and it's the same thing, doing the same idea, building that up. So now we're starting to get a really good feel to this character. So the next thing, now that I've created the highlight or the direct light area, I want to jump back now and I want to go into the shadows a little bit more. So now that we've defined kind of that balanced shadow direct light area, now it's time to go in and hit some of those areas that are going to be in deeper shadow where the light really just isn't hitting. So what I'll do is I'll create a layer over the direct light. I'm going to call it deeper shadows. All right. And then I'm going to set that blend mode to multiply once again. Grab that cool color, but I'm going to go a little darker this time. Okay? Knock that brush size down. Now I'm going to come in and just thinking about where some of these areas might go really dark, like under some of these leaves. There might not be any kind of reflected light getting in there, and it'll help really define some of this form a little bit more. And you'll notice that I'm still pretty loose with all the foliage and stuff that's growing off of this character. And through that looseness, as I build details up, the form will slowly start to come together as I'm thinking about the way the light is playing on top of kind of all the different foliage and everything that I'm trying to create. Okay? So I'm just creating, little shadows under all of these, maybe because they're in the direct light, there's a shadow being cast under these leaves. And all of a sudden the leaves will start to separate off the body a little bit more. So ultimately what I'll end up with is this. Let me drop that down in size a little bit. And I'll turn that on and off so you can see that it's subtle, but it starts to really define the drawing and the form a little bit more. Okay? So turning that on, you can see we've got the form starting to come together a little bit better. It's still very loose, and we'll start to refine it as we build things up. Okay, so now we've done the direct or the deeper shadows. The next thing I like to do is I want to get into what I was talking about earlier. I want to get into that reflected light, and you're going to see that I'm going to add a lot of light in the shadows right now, because ultimately we're going to bring in later on, we're going to bring in some photographic textures that are going to go over some of this reflected light that we're going to create, and it's going to darken everything. So the light areas and the reflected light areas are going to kind of come together a little bit, but we'll pull them apart again. They'll go brighter and darker as we progress through the painting. But what I want to do is I want to explain reflected light. So for those of you that don't know, reflected light is not direct light. Obviously, it's reflected. And so you get a lot of reflected light in shadows. Think about a very basic, simple example is think about an egg. If you put an egg on a white table and you shine a light on it, you're going to have a very bright direct light hitting the egg. And it'll cast a shadow. But then there's light that's bouncing off the table. Okay, there's light bouncing off the table and illuminating some of the shadow areas under that egg. Okay, and that's reflected light. A perfect example that we see once a month, every month of our lives, is a full moon. A full moon is bouncing light back onto the earth. So when you walk outside on a night of a full moon, you're walking in reflected light off of the moon. It's very, very magical. But what I'll do is I'll go in and I'll grab, once again, some of that color that I want to add reflected light to. Let's say this arm, and I'm thinking about light bouncing off some of the leaves in the background that we're going to ultimately have, maybe the body that we're going to have. We're going to add some rim lighting in there. So I'm thinking about how that light might play. I'm going to brighten that up, warm it up, and I'm just going to come in and start working some of these areas. I'm imagining this arm catching light on this side. catching light here. This leg is going to catch some light along the edges here. And once again, in the shadow areas, what's this doing? Well, it's helping to define the form again. It's all about creating form through light and shadow. On this leg, maybe the leg is reflecting back some cool light, maybe some direct sky color. So I'll go really cool with it, maybe a little brighter. Start adding some highlight, reflected light. Highlight, reflected light, if that makes sense. Okay. I'm just coming through and just hitting all these little edges. And that's the other thing too. You can come in, I'm going to go a little warmer, maybe a little brighter, and I can go in and these edges are going to catch some light. And I can start defining, once again, talking about defining these details. Even though we're loose, I can start defining some of these details a little bit more now. And I'll come through and just really start to work these up. Okay? These leaves will catch a little bit of reflected light, these edges here. So it's all about building up that form a little bit more. And these arms, over here, I want a lot of reflected light over there. So I'm going to brighten that up here. I'm going to come in. That arm is will ultimately be catching a lot of reflected light there. More reflected light over here. Anyway, it'll just build up more over here till ultimately I've got something that looks like this. And you can see I've gone in and I've built up all these little details. You can see the form starting to come together. I've started working up all the reflected light on the legs, the arms, along the cheek, on the face, that sort of thing. Okay, so I'm going to turn on there. So now that I've turned on the direct light back on, and we've got that combined with our reflected light and our deeper shadows and all that, we really got some form that's starting to come together. Now at this stage, I started thinking I'd like to lay in a bit of a background. And so what I'll do is create a layer underneath everything. And what do you call it? Of course, background. And because I'm going to be pushing it out of focus, I'm not too worried about being really detailed. So what I'll do is I'll grab a really big brush, go really big with it. And in this case, I want the greens to play off of some warm colors in the background. And because it's a fall issue, let's make all the foliage kind of a fall color. So what I'll do is just very, very roughly just start to lay in some color. I'm going to go a little smaller with it, say 900 pixels. I'll just start laying in some background color. Go dark with it because I want him to kind of pop off the background. And I'll start, the whole idea here is to really lay it in quickly, like so. And there we go. And I can go in and go dark, and I can create trees, tree branches in the background. Anyway, I'll add leaves, all that kind of stuff. And I'll stay very, very loose like you see here. And then I just go up to filter, blur, and then come down to Gaussian blur. And I'll set it to about, about 37, 40 pixels, something like that, and blur the background. So we're going to start creating that depth. But if I get rid of the one the example I've been showing, and I'll just turn on the background that I ended up with, that's what I created. Just working very, very loose. Then I grabbed the brush and started laying in, playing with value and color and just laying in some of these leaves in the background. And then I just blurred the whole thing so that now I've got this creature kind of sitting in a forest, and I can more accurately judge how he's going to sit in the environment. Okay. Also, you'll see at this stage that some of that rough drawing is showing through. I'm gonna come in, I'm gonna turn off that rough drawing now. We can get rid of it. We don't really need it anymore. And so now we're starting to get a nice, clean looking image. All right. I want the lighting though, I want the lighting to be more dynamic. And so now I want to create something like, I want to create another highlight area or secondary light source. It's going to be called, I'm going to call it the rim lighting. And what rim lighting is basically a secondary light source in this painting, because we've got a dominant light source, which is over our right shoulder, but I want something just to show off the form, to give it a little bit more drama. Actually, if you watch movies in forest scenes, they'll often, create a secondary light source in the trees somewhere so you can get more drama out of it. And that's what I kind of want to do here. And so I'm imagining a light source that's down in the trees, down behind the character and down low, still warm, that's going to shine through the leaves, and we're going to get some really nice, bright, warm colors. And so what I'll do is above my shadow layer, I'll create another layer and call it, what are we going to call it? Rim lighting. There we go. And what I want it to be, I want it to be nice and bright. So I'm going to grab some of that reflected light color, but I want to go warmer with it. And I'm going to go bright with it. And I'm going to start thinking, now I'm really thinking about some of the observations that I've made in life. If you go out into the forest and you look at light shining through leaves, they're translucent, and you get these really warm colors coming through, and where leaves overlap, you'll get shadows and that sort of thing. And that's what I want to start creating here. So I'm going to grab my custom brush, and I'm going to come in, and look how bright that is. But what I'm going to do, I'm going to bring that size down just a little bit. As I'm thinking about, okay, some of these other leaves are casting, go even smaller with it. Some of these other leaves are casting shadows where the light can't shine through. Maybe these leaves are overlapping a little bit. But I'm thinking about that light in the background, okay? So here I knew I wanted more foliage. So because I'm creating another layer, I'm not messing up anything that I've done before, okay? And I'm just working it and building it up. I want more light underneath the arms here. I want more light over here on this arm. I really want to think, thinking about some of that more direct light that we're getting from that secondary light source. Getting it here. So once again, like I said earlier, we'll end up with this secondary light that is really, really kind of coming through and creating the luminosity in the leaves that I like so much. Okay, so we've got that. Now I want to go back in, and I want to deepen some of these shadows even more. So I'll create another layer on top, and once again, naming it Deeper Shadows, but this time I'm going to name it Deeper Shadows 2, because I'm building up layer after layer after layer. Go to Multiply, put that blend mode on Multiply, go to that cool color again, a little darker, and once again I'm going to come in, and you can see, blow this up a little bit, you can see me building up some of these darker areas to get ideas, to get things to recess back just a little bit better. Back here it might be a little darker. This ear, I want to push it back a little further, so I'll darken that. And you'll see that form just starts to come alive. I'll push some darks back there, so that ultimately we end up with something that looks like this. You can see some of these darker shadows, where the form is really starting to come together. Look at the leg. Look at the leg down below, how down in this area, I'm going to blow this up. Here it's still a little bit flat in this area, but when I go in and add those deeper shadows, that form starts to materialize, okay? So I'm going to get rid of that. Turn that on. So look at that. So we're really starting to get some nice form to it. The other thing I like to do at this stage is I like to flop the drawing. Actually, I do it in the drawing stage too. I'll flop it back and forth and look at it in reverse. The reason I like to do that is it'll show imperfections in your drawing. You can see things in a new light. So I've got a lot of layers right now. Let's see if it'll do it. So I go to Image, Rotation, and then flip canvas horizontally. And hopefully, there we go. Now I can see it differently, and see how you just get a whole new perspective on it. And so Because I've done this already, I've kind of got everything balanced. So I like the way it's feeling, but you know, you can see the lighting a little differently. You can see the drawing a little bit differently. And it's just a nice habit to get into. Flop your drawings back and forth. If you're working traditionally, use a mirror, hold them up to a mirror. You know, that's something I've been doing that for years and years. And I started doing that before I went digital. And you know, thank goodness you've got just a flop key. You can just flop it right over. Okay, so we like it. I'm going to bring it back, and we're just going to continue on. One thing that we haven't done yet in the eye are the eyes. They feel a little bit dead. We've got the color and everything in there, but I want to start getting that glossy, nice, light, wet feel to them. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to create a layer on top of everything, and I like to keep the eye details separate, just in case I want to change them. And I'll go to I'll just call it eye highlights. Okay. Now the first thing I think about is I create a layer, or we've created the eye highlights layer, but I'm going to grab a color, and I want that like a sky blue, because I'm thinking, you know, the glassy part of the eye. If you look at, you know, if you observe in nature, especially people with dark eyes, you'll get a lot of the sky color in there first. So I'm just going to grab maybe the standard brush you've got here in Photoshop, bring the size way down. Bring that opacity way down. Okay? I'm going to blow this up. I'm going to imagine that top part of that eye reflecting back some sky. See that? It's very subtle, reflecting back a little bit of sky there. And already it starts to feel a little bit glossy. It feels like it's reflecting back some sky in the background. And then on top of that, I'm going to go really warm because I want that sunlight, that sun highlight to shine through. I'm going to drop the size way down of the brush, bring the opacity up, put the tapered setting on. I'm going to come up, and once again, thinking about that light source being kind of over our shoulder and to the right, I want to mimic that in the highlight. You want that highlight to be consistent with where your light source is, otherwise it won't look right. So I'll add a little highlight there, add a little highlight there. And then even in the bottoms of the eyes, you can see I've done it a little bit here. You know, that's all wet, and it's going to catch little bits of light and reflect back. It'll start to feel kind of wet. You see that? Very simple, but it's very effective. Okay? So I'm going to get rid of that, turn those highlights on, and that's what we've created. It feels, I think it feels pretty good. So now, this is where we've worked our way up to the textured stage. We want to start adding some really fun textures. This is where your image is going to start really taking a leap forward, starting to, you know, it'll start to feel real. It'll start coming into that real realm. You'll notice that even though we've worked up a lot of details here, it's still, you know, a little bit loose. You could say it's loose. But these textures that we're going to drag over and add to the creature will really start to kind of pull it together. Okay. So one thing I like to do is I keep libraries and libraries of different textures. One of my favorite textures to use, especially for these creatures, is elephant skin. It's got a lot of character, there's a lot of definition to it, and it just works really well for little creatures like this. I travel all over the world chasing wildlife. That's another career that I have, which is wildlife painting. So I've gone to Africa and India and Nepal. And so here are some shots of some elephants that I shot in Nepal, of some Asian elephants. I've got a whole slew of them. Matter of fact, I have a big file of them available on my website, creatureartteacher.com. But if you look at this, I'm going to turn that off. There we go. Look at this right here. This area on the nose, some really, really great texture. Okay. So, and if you look at our creature, let's blow, whoops, right here. There we go. If we blow up our creature, look at that. We got a nice little area right there where we can put some of that texture. So I'm going to bring this down. All we do is grab our source, our texture source, and I'm going to grab the lasso tool, which is up in the upper left here. Grab that lasso tool. I'm going to come over, and I'm just going to pick an area that I want to drag over. And let's say I like that area right there. Blow that up. See that? And that's very simple. I'm just going to grab the move tool and put the cursor on it. See that? You can move it around and just drag it right over to the document. See that? Boom, it's sitting right on top. Actually, I'm going to move that. There we go. I want it on top of everything. There. So, well, obviously, we can't do much with that. So the first thing I want to do is I'm going to knock that opacity down a little bit so I can see through it, because now I want to size it. Okay? So I'm going to come over here. I'm going to go up to Edit, drop down to Free Transform. You see that? Click on that, and it's going to give you a box. Now I'm going to hold down the Shift key because I want to keep it the same proportion, but I want to just drop the size, blow it up a little bit more so we can work a little better. Now watch, I'm going to keep it, oh, there we go. Keep it just a little bit bigger than where I want it to go, because now that we got it in place, I'm going to go back up to Edit, Transform, and Warp. Now watch what I'm going to do. I'm going to bring these edges in. The Warp tool enables you to fit the different pieces to whatever area you want to fit them to. See that? I can get that texture to just fit right on his face. It's very, very cool. But it still doesn't sit quite right. So I want that painting to come through. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to drop that opacity way down, to about 30%. Well, it almost disappears, doesn't it? Well, if I come up to Image, Adjustments, and then Exposure. Go to Exposure. I'm going to push that gamma correction way up, and you'll see it gets slightly darker. See that? And then if I play with the exposure, all of a sudden that texture really starts to come through. You see that? Look at that. And it's sitting right in there really well. And then, we've still got these harsh edges along the sides here. So I'm just going to come over to my eraser, grab the airbrush setting, which is standard with Photoshop. Come back over here and set the opacity way down. And I'm just going to lightly start feathering out these edges so we don't have any harsh edges. There we go. There we go. And you see now we've got texture sitting right on top of his nose. That's the start. What you're going to do is you're going to grab textures from all different sources and start building up your creature like a mosaic. For instance, here is another image of the same elephant that I liked. I'm looking at, okay, let's look under the eye here, and I'm looking at the eye here. There might be something interesting there. So what I'll do is I'll grab that little section like so. See that? I've grabbed that little section, and I'll just drag it over once again. Drop that opacity down, free transform, bring that size down. There we go. Bring that size down a little bit. Just tilt it. And then we'll go to warp. Once again, I can get that form to sit right in there. Look at that. I can just work it up, work it up. Image, adjustments. Oops, actually let's drop the opacity down. About 36%. Image, adjustments, exposure, gamma correction, exposure, and I'm just going to keep working it, play with it until we get something we like. Then I can come in, feather out some of these edges. You can see these textures start bringing a little bit more photographic character, life, whatever you want to call it, to the drawing. So that ultimately, here I'll turn on the texture layer. After I've, this will take a few hours, but I'll build up all the textures. I'll put leaf textures on the leaves back here. I'll put leaf textures on the ears back here. Just build up the whole thing. I grabbed some texture and put it over the chin, so that ultimately I ended up with something that looked like this. So you can see, I added those textures around the eyes, some wrinkles up above. There's those trunk textures. I went in and found some skin on the leg of the elephant that had a very nice kind of dotted pattern over here that I really liked. And look at this over here. The leaves. See the leaves, the leaf textures I put in? For me, it's all about speed. When I'm doing something like this, yes, someone asked me, is that cheating? Well, in a way, yes, it's cheating. But as far as I'm concerned, in the world of creating imagery for film, which is what I do, there is no cheating. It's whatever it takes to get to that finished point. Because what you want to do, my phone keeps going off. What you want to do is try to get this stuff done as quickly as possible, because time is money. So the quicker you can get these things done and get to that finished look, the better off you're going to be. So this is, like I said, a kind of a technique that I came up with that's going to speed things up, and it gets me to that finished look all the more quickly. And you can see even in the arms, I added some subtle, very subtle little skin textures. You can see in the hand over here. It's all very subtle, but it adds to the character of the imagery. Look at the leaf textures that I was able to add in that really give life to the character and really give that sense that we got this little elfy leaf creature. Okay, so you see all that kind of stuff. That's all just from adding those layers and working it up like a mosaic. Okay, so once that is done, we want, the textures are nice, but we want to get them to sit even better on top of the character. So the next thing I like to do is I'm going to create a new layer on top of the textures. And actually, I'm going to turn on, I forgot that, yeah, there's another layer back there that for some reason I have them separate. I don't know why. But I'm going to create on top of everything, I'm going to create the texture highlights. So this is a stage where I go in and I start looking at the texture that I've laid in there and how the light might fall on some of that texture. This is where it all starts to come together and to start to really sing. So I'm going to grab some of the color here, and I'm going to go really bright with it, really warm. I'm going to grab a nice detailed brush. I like to use, once again, going back to those Photoshop standard brushes. Here's that erodible, it looks like a little pencil. I grab that one, it's got number 9. I'm actually going to drop it down to about 7 pixels. I'm going to blow this up, knock that opacity up. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to come in and really start to define. And this takes a little while. But what I want to do is I want to define the form around some of these textures that I've created. So you can see there's a wrinkle there, so I'm adding some highlights along the edges of that wrinkle. There's some wrinkles in here I want to add highlights to. And I just go through and I start working. So look at the texture in the lips right here. Well, I'm going to come in here, I'm going to grab some light color there, go really bright with it. I'm going to come in. Maybe all of this is highlight, but then I want to mimic some of that texture so that some of these little lumps in the skin are catching light. See that? It's very quick, but you can see now that texture starts to feel like it's a part of the painting. Do the same thing up here and go even warmer with it. There we go. Just work this whole thing. I'll do the same thing in the leaves. Look at the leaves here. I'm going to come up. I'm going to go along the edges of some of these veins that I've created. Just really define them a little bit more. So now all these textures feel like they're part of the painting. Okay? So that, see how it starts to sit in there? So that ultimately we've got something that looks like this. Now look at that. So now using those textures, I was able to go in and paint over the top of that and bring everything together. See that? So now it starts to feel it's that next stage where it just starts to sing. Now we're almost done. We're getting there. So But there's one more stage before we start adding some foreground elements and start kind of doing those finishing details. There's one more stage that I like to do, especially on my creatures like this. I want to add some markings. I want to add some interest to the character. There's a lot of green here. So one thing I'd like to do is I want to add some other green markings, maybe some red markings, that sort of thing. So what I'll do is underneath the textured highlights, because I want those highlights to sit on top of the markings will actually be part of the skin. If you think about a frog and with all the markings that a frog has, all those the different pigments and that sort of thing are under the skin. So I want to make sure that the layer that I'm putting in is going to be underneath the highlight layer. At the very least, you can even sometimes put it underneath the textured layer. In this case, I'm just going to put it under the highlight layer. I'm going to double click it. I'm going to call it skin markings. Okay. And I'm going to set it to multiply, because I really want it to feel like it's part of that skin. I'm going to grab a nice warm, well actually let's just start with the green. I'm going to go with the green, somewhat dark. And the other cool thing or reason that I like to put these markings in is that, and you'll see what happens, it starts to really show off the form. I can wrap these markings, let me blow this up so you can see it a little better. I can wrap these markings around the form of the character, and it just starts to feel a little bit more like it's sitting in space. Okay, and once again, because I've got this set to multiply, when it goes into shadow it goes a little bit darker, when it comes into light it goes a little bit lighter, so it already feels like it's sitting within that lit area that we've created. Okay, so now we're starting to get some fun markings. I'll come through and just very quickly do the whole creature. Decide where I want some of these markings. I'll go the whole arm. I'll do this arm. Just put markings everywhere so that ultimately, and I can play with different colors too, but ultimately what I'm going to end up with is I'm going to have something that looks like this. And you can see where I've gone through. I went in with some red and some of these leaves on the face. Oops. On the face. On the leaves up here. I look a lot at, different birds, different reptiles and that sort of thing. Insects, I look at their markings and I like to try to mimic that kind of stuff in my paintings. So now, I even add, a little bit of imperfections in the ears, some little spots here and there. But see how those markings just sit right on top of the character and they really start to show off the form. Look how much that's really kind of taken a leap when we added those in, and we put them underneath, like I said, underneath that textured highlight layer, so that those highlights will sit on top and it feels like these markings are actually inside the skin. Okay, so there you go. So that's we've pretty much completed the painting layer of this character. So now we're gonna do a little bit of manipulation and have some fun with it. I want to be able to work on all those layers all at once. So what I'm going to do is I've got them all created in a group here. I'm just going to go ahead and, there we go. I'm going to copy that group, turn off the one underneath, and so you can see I've got everything there. I'm going to copy that group, and I'm going to go up to Layer, Merge Group. Okay, so now that I've got it on Merge Group, it's just a single layer. Everything's combined, but if I turn that off, I've still got all my different layers saved underneath. Okay, so I'm going to just turn that off and on. You can see everything is on one layer, because what I want to do now, I've got an extra group here that I don't need. There we go. So what I want to do now is I want to play with that depth of field. Now that I've got everything combined, once again, I've taken all of those layers that we've just created, the rough drawing, the refined drawing, the local color, blah, 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 all the way up to these final markings that we've created. I've put them all into a group, and I copied them, and then I flattened them all into one layer. Okay, so that's what we've got. I want to start playing with that depth of field. So I want to start pushing things out of focus. So the first thing I like to do is I want to kind of push all of this, the tree and its textures and the feet and hands and all that. You'll see I didn't really take them to a huge degree of finish because I'm going to push them out of focus. The first thing I want to do is I'm going to come up to filter, And oh, the other thing I like to do, just in case, once I combine everything, I'll copy it. Okay? I want two of everything because in case I mess up, I can always go back to the other layer. So I'm going to turn this one off, the one underneath. I'm going to go to my copy, and I'm going to come up to Filter, come down to Blur, and Tilt Shift. Okay? Tilt Shift is great in the new in Photoshop because it creates just that. It creates this great tilt shift where you can kind of play with what you want to go in and out of focus. So I'm going to come over here and I'm going to turn it this way. I want this tree to go out of focus and the arm, but I want the head and this whole part of the body, I want that to be in focus. So you can see everything within these two lines right here will be in focus. And then it starts to blur from this line to this dashed line. Once you've hit the dashed line, that's your maximum blur, so it won't get any blurrier beyond that. So you can come in and you can control that. You can say, well, I want to gradually blur further out, okay? Or I want the blur to happen, sooner. But either way, you can come in and you can play with that blur. There we go. I'll put it right there. And I'm going to pull this one over just a little bit. I'm going to knock up there we go. Let's knock that up just a little bit. I'm going to hit return. We'll wait a little bit, and you'll see it takes a little because there's a lot happening here. But we'll see this whole see that whole side, how it kind of blurred out, and it starts to sit kind of nicely there. Next thing I want to do, now that I've kind of got that base done, I'm going to come up and I'm going to grab my smear tool. Now this is where I can start to really detail the areas that I want to be blurred, or I can get blurry details, I guess. I'm not sure. But I'm grab my smear tool. I'm going to come up to my airbrush setting. I'm going to knock it up to about 200 pixels, somewhere in there. Okay. I'm going to set it at about 50%. Now watch this. Now because I'm playing with the depth of field, there's certain things that I want in focus. I want that head to be in focus, that face, right? Well, anything behind that, I want to push out of focus. So, the ear, the shoulder, all this kind of stuff is going to start to go out of focus. And because we've got it on that airbrush setting, watch, I'm just lightly hitting it. And all of a sudden, it goes out of focus, just lightly hitting it. Got it at 50%. And look at that, all of a sudden, I do the same thing on the other side. Because this leaf is coming forward, it'll gradually get more and more focused. But look at that. It's all getting pushed back. This leaf here, I want to push that way back. Maybe the edges of the ears back here, because they're in the background. They're getting pushed back. Come up here. These little pieces of grass, stems coming off of our character, we can blur those. Maybe the edges up here will blur. And I'll go through the whole body and just, think about those types of things. I'm thinking about where things are in space, and I'll blur them out accordingly. These stems back here, I want them to go way out of focus, but I want to keep that leaf in the foreground, or this leaf here in the foreground. I want to push that out of focus. Same with this. I'm sorry, that leaf in the foreground, I want to keep it in focus. So, you can start really playing with your depth, and you get this really great kind of photographic effect. So that ultimately, I'm going to continue with that. So the other thing, let me go through. I'm going to push some of these other areas just out of focus a little bit more, so you can get a nice sense of it. There we go. So now what I'd like to do is I want to add some foreground elements. Okay, so now that we've kind of worked through, you can see I've got some nice blurred areas all through here. I've got that sitting really nice. It still feels bland. You can see this foreground. We've got a lot to do in this foreground, so I want to create some foreground elements. And once again, just like I did in the background, I'm going to treat it very loose, very quick. I'm going to create a layer on top of our character layer here. And I'm going to just call it foreground. Okay, and just like we did before, I'm going to be very loose. I want to grab want to grab some of this color, but I'm going to make it a little brighter. And I'm going to grab that brush, my custom brush that I've created. Make it fairly large. Okay. And I just want to start creating leaves. These foreground leaves. I'm thinking about them sideways and how they might grow, but I'm just going very, very loose. Thinking about them like in clumps and that sort of thing coming through. I'll go in and I'll hit some brighter ones. Go on top there. I'll come through, I'll go dark, go thin with it, and I'll start adding very loosely some branches coming down like so. But ultimately I'm just going to build up. I want to put some very kind of detail-y ones here, but once again it's all going to be it's going to be blurred out. I'm going to go back to my leaves, so I'm not worried about being really super detailed. There we go. Build up leaves on top of those branches. Anyway, I'm going to build up that whole thing so that ultimately, and then blur it, so that ultimately, whoops, we end up with something that looks like this. So you can see, let me come back to this. So you can see what I've done is I've created these very, very kind of abstract colors, and then imagine that we've filled this whole thing in, and I'll go to filter, blur, oops, I'm sorry, filter, blur, Gaussian blur. I can pull back on that, pull back on the amount. You can see it just sits right on top there. All right, so that if I were to fill that whole thing in, we'd end up with something that looks like this. And you can see, these are all kept pretty loose. But when you blur it together, it gives it a very kind of photographic quality. You can see I worked in a whole bunch of little details back here and then just blurred it. And now we've got a creature that's really sitting in the environment. Look up here. I added some leaves over the top of the branches to get it to sit kind of in that world. So now, once again, it's just a matter of kind of doing some finishing details. One thing I like to do is add a couple of layers on top. And I want to add, I like to put things in the air, little insects, that sort of thing. So I'm going to come in and grab a nice light color. There we go. I'm going to come in and just add little specks, little leaves, little wings, flying around. And I'll just go through the whole thing. And then what I can do is I can come over to my smear tool. Once again, I've got that on that airbrush setting, and boom, I'll just hit them, and they'll be going in different directions so that it looks like, look at that. Oh, they're flying. They're flying in different directions. You see, so I'll do a whole bunch of those. So I'll fill out all that out. And then the other thing I'm going to do, once again, I want to combine all of these layers. So I'm going to come up here. I'm going to take the foreground, actually, and the insects. I'm going to combine them together. Okay, so we've got this one layer. Oh, actually, I want that background included. So basically, I'm flattening everything. So now we've got everything is on one layer, okay? And I want to push that color a little bit. I want things to be a little bit more vibrant. So I'll come in and I'm going to come up to Image, Adjustments, Hue and Saturation, and I can play with the saturation a little bit. We're going to make it a little bit more bright. See, this is where you can really play with your color a little bit. And I can come up to Image, Adjustments, Exposure, and let's say I want a little more contrast. Play with that exposure in there so we get some nice little burned out areas in our character over here. So that ultimately, I'll turn that off, we end up with something that looks like this. You can see all the little insects that I created in there and had some fun smearing around I played with that exposure, so I got that light to really kind of pop and sing. And so that, and then and at the very end, yeah, don't forget to sign it. So you've got, so that's it. It was kind of a long-winded way of going through the process, but once again, I just want to emphasize that I do everything the same way every time. So it starts with that gray background. You start with, on top of that, you create a rough drawing. You play with that rough drawing. Have some fun experimenting. Once you end up with a form that you like, then you knock that opacity back, create a layer on top, and you're going to do the refined drawing. You get in there and do all your details. Once that's done, remember that's the roadmap for the rest of your drawing, so make it as good as you can. After that's done, you create a layer underneath that and you lay down your local color. Local color is the color of an object before it's been lit or in shadow. And then you go in and you create your shadows and you create your lights. And you go in and you make your darker shadows and then your brighter highlights. And then it's just, you multiply it from there. And you go to your markings, your textures, all that kind of stuff. Slowly build it up. Don't be afraid to use lots of layers, because layers can be your friend. Because you get something looking good, and then all of a sudden you make a mistake on that layer that you got looking good, you can't really fix it. But if you create layers on top of layers, you can pull layers away, you can experiment, you can have fun. So anyway, I hope that helps. This is my process. I hope it kind of helps your process. And thank you very much for buying this issue and listening to me ramble, and I'll talk to you later. Thanks. Bye.